Hello and welcome back to another phone review. I have the Xiaomi Redmi 4X in for testing today. This was sent in via Gearbest for review, and I was quite keen to look at this phone because it's got pretty good reputation. I wanted to see for myself if it's any good. The included items here, I have the EU adapter. This is a 2 amp fast charger, the micro USB cable, and there's the pin for opening the SIM slot. Standard packaging on this is pretty basic. Xiaomi tend to be very minimalistic with their instructions and extras, and this is no exception. Just a basic guide on how to change the SIM card, put a memory card in, and just some of the overview of the features. This is the global version that I'm looking at, and I'll explain why that's important later on. As far as the handset goes, it looks pretty much standard for a 5-inch 720p phone. It's quite a very ordinary looking phone in many ways, and I've listed out some of the specs on screen for you. You'll notice that there are quite a lot of sensors here. We also have a pretty decent octa-core processor. It's entry level, but that's actually not a bad choice. You'll see reasons why that is. Possibly the sensors is the main one. And depending on which version you get, you should take note with the, particularly with the network connections, because that varies between the models, between the international and the native version. The Chinese version, I believe, doesn't have the Google Play Store, but the global version is supporting OTA updates, because I've updated it twice since the review unit turned up. At the top we've got the headphone jack. There is the infrared blaster in the middle. That's an interesting feature we'll look at later. Buttons on the side, right hand side. The back is metal, but the tops are plastic, and you have the micro USB connector, single speaker on this phone. Taking out the slot now for the memory card, you can fit a micro or nano in there, but you'll lose one of the slots if you are using the micro SD card for storage expansion. Pretty much what you get with most phones. The only grumble I've got with the design is that the navigation buttons aren't very easy to see. They're quite faint. Even low light, it's not very easy to see them, and they're not backlit either. At the top here we have the 5 megapixel front facing camera. Now when you boot up the phone, you'll notice that they are using their own particular version of Android. They've skinned it, and it does take a bit of getting used to. Some of the settings and options are a little bit different to the stock Android, but there are also some interesting features that are included too, and you can customize it pretty much in the same way that you can with a normal Android phone. As far as the icons and the apps that are installed, we have quite a few of the Google ones, and they also have some of their own apps included as well, some tools. Have to admit, it does look a bit Apple-ish. You can't really deny that. There are certain elements there which do bear a resemblance. This is on the gyroscope here. We have the compass. Not a lot of phones at this price range will have these sensors, so it's nice to see that. You can also use other features with the phone which might not be present on some phones, such as Google Cardboard, and the infrared blaster is actually quite useful. You can set this up, you pick the particular device that you're using, and then you can go through and it essentially just works out which one from a preset list. It doesn't have a learning function as such, but they seem to be updating it over time, and I didn't have problems using it with the TV or the Android box that I had. You also get cleaning tools included. Some of these, if you don't want them, you can get rid of them. As far as the settings go, it's pretty logical, but there are some quirks involved with the MIUI. I quite like it. It is fairly useful, particularly with some things like this reading mode here, which will give you a sort of warmer tint at night, but easier on the eyes. There are a few settings which are tucked away in a different location to stock Android. You can adjust the screen if you wish, make it a bit warmer or cooler. I found it pretty good out of the box on the standard setting. And there seems to be quite a bit of support from Xiaomi with the community regarding wallpapers and skins, so you can browse through there and have a look. They also have a pretty active forum where they seem to be engaging users who are looking for improvements and modifications. It's always nice to see how many of those actually come through. We'll have to wait and see. We're still running Android 6 on this phone. Now, the latest update was MIUI 8.5, and that upgraded twice since I got it, so hopefully we're going to get that Android 7 update fairly soon. There is a child mode as well, so it will disable things like calls and texting, but I did find that some regions were missing. The UK was added with 8.5, but there are some countries missing as well, such as Canada, Iceland I think was missing, and a few other countries as well. They need to really go through that. We do have a little quick ball which you can access, shortcuts. I wouldn't use all of these features myself, I'll just be honest, but it's nice to have a bit of customization there if you want. You can spend quite some time looking through the phone and picking out different options to tweak, including a one-handed mode here. Like I said, I wouldn't use a lot of these features, but over a bit of time you'll be able to tinker around. If you like playing around with the phone and setting it up how you want, you'll probably be quite happy with this. As far as the camera goes, we have what appears to be fairly standard 12 megapixel camera on the back, single camera, but the interface is quite good on the app. You can scroll through and pick different filters. You can also directly take the picture from the point that you focused on. There's quite a lot of different effects included in this. The front camera is 5 megapixel. It's not as good obviously as the rear one, but it's still perfectly acceptable for selfies and doing video calls. Couple of areas with the camera though to note: the focus does slow down a bit in low light, though you can use the LED flash, but it's quite quick outside, certainly quicker than most phones. Very snappy performance, and the screen doesn't lag even in poor lighting conditions. You do have quite a few settings with the modes that you can try, including night, sunset, etc., and they work pretty well. The manual mode is limited to adjustment of the white balance and ISO, which goes up to 3200. So there's no manual focus or shutter speed or anything like that, but still you have a reasonable amount of control over the camera. This is just to show you through some of the camera settings. Everything that you'd probably want is here. You're not limited to just using this app. You could try other apps. As far as the video side, there isn't a lot going on. Just really have a time-lapse mode that's quite short on features, and it doesn't have stabilization, which is a bit of a downer. You might want to try a different app to get that feature, particularly if you're hand holding video and moving around at the same time. But at least you can adjust things like contrast and saturation. The images are slightly contrasty and saturated out of the camera straight away, but you can always tweak that if you want. But they're quite pleasing, and the color balance is also on target most of the time. It also has a light mode included, which simplifies everything with really big icons. It also gives you voice feedback with numbers that you punch in. Could be useful for relatives or something like that, people that just want something very simple to use. And lots of sensors included on this. We found that the GPS performance was above average, good accuracy, and the fingerprint sensor is quick. Certainly quicker than most of the budget phones that I've looked at to date. Good performance on Geekbench, over 2100 and up to 2130. And it did pretty well on AN222, over 42,000. And this is my test, the Bonsai benchmark. Again, decent score. This isn't a high-end processor, but it does well. And the battery came in at a good capacity, pretty much on the advertised spec. Also the Wi-Fi connection, very solid and good range. Certainly decent gaming performance for a budget phone. The 720 display helps there. I don't think anyone's going to be unhappy with the gaming performance for most normal games. And your notification light, single colour, also flashes when the battery is low. Now looking at the video, you have to watch lens flare on this camera. You can see that going across the top of the screen. The details are not bad, they're pretty good, bit on the contrasty side. But the lack of stabilisation is my main grumble with that area. Now taking some pictures, this is a standard mode. And then I switched it over to the HDR just to see what was happening. You can see that it's pulled in those highlight details quite nicely and also lifted up the shadows a bit. And zooming in, the details are actually really good. Quite surprised with the camera on this. This is the front facing camera. Not as good, but still perfectly acceptable. You also have a couple of interesting filters that you can use. This is the sketch one. LED flash exposures were good. It tends to throttle down quite nicely, doesn't overexpose very often. You can see with the ambient light there is a drop in saturation in really low light. But in standard low light, such as the cat picture here, and I will zoom in, you can see it does a pretty decent job of holding on to the details. I'm very pleased with the camera. It's definitely the best camera I've used to date in a phone of this price. Just for fun, I decided to compare it to the Lumia 950, which is a much higher end camera, and it didn't embarrass itself at all, the Redmi 4X. Not as much detail in the shots, but still very good. A little bit of clipping on this one, but you can see zooming right in, nice details and good contrast as well. The images are attractive out of this phone. I really think most people can be very happy, but if you get bored with the standard look, just as I've done here, you can change to a different launcher. Summing up on the Redmi 4X phone, there's a couple of standout features with this phone mixed in with a good solid performance overall, and those are the battery life. This phone can easily go for 2 days, possibly 3 or 4 if you are a light user, and that is significantly better than a lot of phones on the market. Really, I found it impossible to kill the battery in a day, even with very heavy use, browsing, playing games, lots of screen on time. I still had a good 35% battery left at the end of the day, and that was really hammering in it. So if you're someone that uses a phone and is heavy on the battery, this is really going to go down well with you. The other standout area was the camera, which is really very good for a budget phone. It's not perfect. The lack of video stabilization is a downside, but the details and colors are excellent out of the phone, and with the HDR mode, the dynamic range is very good. I think most people can be very pleased with the camera performance on this. Saying that, there's a few areas that might be improved, such as the navigation buttons aren't particularly easy to see, and we're still waiting for that Android 7 update to arrive. Overall though, the Xiaomi Redmi 4X is easily to date the best budget handset that I have used, and certainly worthy of consideration.